Welcome to Reading Between the Lines. This is episode 36, right? 36. Episode 36. Today we have a special guest on. We're talking to Rachael Leigh. She is the author of The Storms We Inherit, which is a new book. I want to say it's like romantasy, but it's not romantasy as you would normally think. It's kind of got its cool little own vibe, which we'll get into and talk about. So we're going to just kind of delve into her brain about The Storms We Inherit, talk through the book, and kind of just get hype around the book. If you haven't read it yet, there will be no spoilers, hopefully, in this episode. But please go get the book, go read it, and just let us know what you think. This is Reading Between the Lines. Rachael, introduce yourself. Let us know a little about The Storms That We Inherit and just kind of like how you came up with this idea and like what this book is about.
Absolutely. So my name is Rachael. I am a writer out of Richmond, Virginia. So I love spending time in the mountains. I love spending time at the beach, and Richmond is kind of this perfect little middle ground of both of those places. I started my writing career as the editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper. That is a title that I, all these years later, will not give up. It will be on my grave. But I've always been interested in writing and loved writing as a creative outlet. And just like so many other people, I wasn't able to pursue it full time. I went into the corporate world. And during COVID, I really took stock of my life for the first time, and again, like so many people did during that time, and thought about, okay, am I really living my passion? Am I really pursuing hobbies that make me happy? And instead of sourdough bread making, I decided to start writing. And so I started The Storms We Inherit just as this kind of passion project during COVID. I would write a paragraph here, write a sentence here, just totally on vibes, no outline, no semblance of an idea of what it would be, just truly paragraphs here and there of this vibe I had in my head. And after about 6 months ish, I was like, I should actually just make this a story. And so then I sat down and still didn't have an outline, which I would really recommend anyone who's starting writing to please outline your book. I had to rewrite it many times to get it to an actual story. But yeah, I started sitting down and actually finishing it into a story, and came up with what it is today. And yeah, it's a really strange genre, to your point, because I say romantasy, but it's since it has such a strange kind of magic system, if you can even call it that, where it's very based in physics, it doesn't feel as fantasy to me as maybe that title implies. I saw someone genre it as coastal fantasy, which I had never heard of, but I was like, sure, it takes place on the coast. We'll go with coastal fantasy. I think my first inclination is to say just dark academia, because it does have quite a bit of themes around dark academia, and that's a genre that's really close to my heart. And so yeah, in your second half of that question was, what is it about? But dark academia. It takes place at a research institute in Boston where the characters are all pursuing research cycles in STEM. So the characters study AI, physics, quantum physics, mathematics, and they use kind of physics to I'm trying to be close about spoilers too, now that I'm thinking about it. Like, what's a spoiler? But yeah, they use physics to interact with other planes of realities. Our two main characters, Norse and Evander, use physics to interact with different planes of realities. And our third character, Lucia, kind of befriends Norse and Evander, and through the plot of the book get intertwined with Evander and Norris's science, get entwined with their access to these second planes of reality. And we kind of learn about her journey of starting as someone who's metaphorically in the dark with who she is, kind of, I guess, her outlook on life, then going into the second plane of reality, using physics, using light, coming into her own, discovering new things, discovering new places within the world, and kind of discovering herself.
And the first thing that I think like caught me off guard was the first chapter. I was like, where the heck is this going? Because like you said, I mean, I don't even really know how to categorize this book because it's fantasy, but it's based in like our lifetime and in our world. And so that's just a little bit different. It's not fantasy as of like there's this new like map and world and all this stuff, even though there is on the second plane. And so it's just kind of, it's so interesting because it's nothing like we've ever read before. And that was such a good thing because it was so out there. And I think it caught me off guard right away because I was just like, wait, what is going on? What is happening? Where are we going with this? And I was like, is there even going to be any sort of magic or anything like that? Turns out there is for those girls out there, and I guess men, but mostly girls that listen to our episodes. Like magic, there's a lot of that in this book as well. And so I think it's definitely different, but it's something that I bet a lot of other people have a similar idea, or it is also out there. And it's definitely something that like I want to pursue now, reading more of books kind of in that dark academia kind of realm. But yeah, so I mean, like my first question, I know you kind of answered this already, but like, where did this idea even come from? Because you had to know so much about physics and science and all this stuff. I know none of that. How did you create this book with that idea?
Yeah, well, I have a PhD in quantum physics. No, I'm just kidding. I absolutely don't. I studied art in college, and I actually have a degree in my master's is liberal arts. So I know nothing about STEM. Math was always my worst subject. I think I came up with this idea, one, starting from, I don't know, like I said, this started during COVID. And if y'all remember the chokehold dark academia had on us in 2020, 2021, that was when I first started my master's program. And I was just so enthralled with the romanticism of sadness in a way, because that time was so sad. And I felt like dark academia was like an outlet of walking on campus in the rain, feeling lonely, and romanticizing it in a way that was really helpful for me during that time. And when I started this, it was purely a like no magic. I don't even know if we can call it magic. I need to think of another way for to say that, because to your point, it's physics based reality shifting, I guess. But it started out with none of that. And then actually I read ACOTAR during this time period too. And I was like 90% done with this book. And it was this basically kind of the same storyline, but everything happened on this version of Bera, where there was no passage into a second reality. And I read ACOTAR and I was like, oh my God, there has to be fantasy. There has to be a man who's really, really old. And there has to be some type of kind of, you know, found family of people from all different times and all different places. How can I make that happen? And to your point about the physics of it, I was thinking, even back in 2021, I was in a rut of romantasy where every story felt kind of like the same magic system or the same landscape or the same story. And I was like, how could I make this a quote fantasy or quote romantasy without giving up any of the integrity of it being dark academia, without giving up any of the integrity of it being set in the modern times, without giving up any integrity of it feeling like it could actually really happen. And so that was my baseline of writing, going back and rewriting it so that there was this fantasy element of how can I get this as close to actually being able to happen as possible. And I was reading a lot on physics, quantum physics, light particle manipulation to see how to explain, physics and that sort of thing or what explains things like black holes or things that are unexplainable to a degree, gravity. So I was like, that seems as close as what I could describe something explaining a alternate reality. And so I have no background in physics at all. It was purely Google. It was purely research papers. Because I had my university email, I was able to search a lot of databases and use library resources to pull up articles that felt, I guess, I could read it and understand it enough to piece things together.
Mm-hmm.
I did my best, and I always say this: if you did study physics, if you did study mathematics or any STEM related field, I would be very scared to hear what you think of this book. Like those drunk history episodes where people are like drunk and like playing history or whatever. I would love to sit down with like a physics girly, get her a few glasses of wine and have her react to my book, because it would probably send her into a coma. I hope that it's believable enough when you read it to people who aren't in STEM. To me, I was like, this sounds like it could work. hopefully at least I accomplished that.
Yeah, I definitely think, it made sense to me, and all I know is what I've seen in like The Flash or like any other show. But I honestly think that this book is a good blend between like the dark academia and the magical realism is probably how I would describe it. The dark academia, the found family, the older man, because let's face it, they're like better when they're more mature, when they're like 500 years old. Like it's like, okay, now they're perfect.
Their frontal lobe is finally developed.
Yeah, yes. It took a hot minute, but it's there.
No, I definitely, fooled me. It could have been, I don't know. I know nothing about science. So, I was kind of, when I was reading it, I was like, okay, am I like understanding this correctly? Like, do I need to look up like scientific things?
No, you don't. You really don't. Please don't, actually.
Well, again, you convinced me. I got to the end and I was like, okay, I think I understand what's going on. But at the same time, this is wild. And it also it caused me to, obviously we don't know a lot. And, magic is real, not real, who knows? But it made my mind kind of go crazy because I'm like, what if this actually could be real? Like what? And like, I went on this spiral of like, could there be like a second plane? Could there be a different idea of reality? Could that actually be a thing? Yeah. And it caused me to think a lot about it. Obviously, probably not real. Unfortunately, question mark. I don't know. But I do think that how you wrote it was very intriguing because it kind of makes it be like, could this be real? And I wish that it could be, or I wish that it couldn't be at the same time.
Like, I like how you wrote like the plot line, but I also like how you wrote the characters. Like Evander, I had mixed feelings about him, and I still have mixed feelings about him, but I like want to see more. Like, I'm like, I may not root for him, but I want more of him.
Yeah, I have a very like soft spot for Evander. He was one of my favorite characters to write. The story started with him mostly as a character, and I have a very big soft spot for him. That is, how can I say this? That in the sequel, I'm having a lot of fun spending time with him as a character and developing him, and he gets quite a bit of face time in the sequel. So if you want to know more about his journey, then you'll get it in the sequel for sure.
This series, I think, is the only this book. I know it's a like series, or there'll be more, but this book, I think, is the first time. Well, there's been a couple arguments between Emma and I about men and which one we want the FMC to end up with. This one, there was a definite disagreement. There still is, and there probably might still be as we continue reading, but there was a definite disagreement on this one. I think this is the first disagreement we've actually had, right, Emma? I feel like maybe Throne of Glass, but that one doesn't really count.
Yeah, that one's, yeah.
So it was very intense.
Between Callan and Evander.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting because I've also had people message me saying they wanted Lucia to end up with a Deem. And I was like, these are too many people.
No, I like Adim, and I like him as a friend, and I want to see more of him, but he gives bestie vibes to me, at least.
I always saw him as like a best friend, but not an MMC. He wasn't dark enough to be a love interest.
Yep. Yeah.
He didn't have enough trauma.
The golden retriever energy is really hard to make a main male character, I feel like, these days, because everyone is so interested in the moody one. It was so funny. One of my friends, she was kind of going back and forth between Callan and Evander. And then I was like, well, I wonder, like, I couldn't make it like a why choose in the sequel. And then I was like, wait, they're cousins. I actually can't do that. I forgot they were cousins.
Very distant.
Yeah. There's even more tension too because they were related. So it's like, wait, can she like both of them? Can she have a relationship with both of them? Like, is that like wrong? Is that unhealthy?
I think it's blurred lines for sure.
But what was so hard about it, trying to choose too and like understand it, is they're on two different planes of reality. So are they really? I don't know. I don't know. Emma and I got into it about it. It was a thing. It's fine. People know that we disagree on things, but we don't disagree on that much. This one, we definitely had a disagreement.
Okay, but I like Evander, and you don't like Colin. So that's like as like a character. Like I like both of them. I just want her with Colin.
Listen, I feel like there's more. Like Rachel, like you said, I'm excited now for to learn more about Evander because I feel like there's more that we don't know yet. That I feel like maybe might change Emma's mind.
It might. Honestly, if Colin ends up being like bad or Evander ends up being good, I don't know. Who knows?
We'll find out. But going to your like writing process, I guess like a question that we have is, what was the hardest part? Because this is your first book, right? This is your first writing.
Couldn't you tell? No, I'm just kidding.
Like, you could be like have all these books and we would never know because you seem like you did it very well. So, but what was like the hardest part, especially because this is your first time doing this?
The hardest part, and I mentioned this before, but I'll sing it till the cows come home. The hardest part was not planning. And that's on me. I wish I could point a finger because everything on the internet says plan your book. But I am by nature not a planner. That's not who I am as a person. I've never once been described as like organized or, calm. And the hardest part was, I think, to that point, since I didn't have a plan for this book until I realized like, oh, this could be a book. Like I should actually figure out a plan. The hardest part was that I didn't stay in my lane as a writer. And what I mean by that is every time, all writers are also readers. And so every time I would read a new book, I'd say, oh, I should put this thing in it too. Like there should be an apothecary because that's cool. And oh my gosh, there has to be this, they have to take a ship from this place to this place. And then there has to be pirates. And then there has to be this thing. And what about a butcher? Like every town has a butchery. Like, why aren't they going to the butchery? And like all of these random things I was reading in all these other books, I kept being like, oh, I need that in my book. I need that in my book. And I thought it was making it a well-rounded world. I thought it was adding depth. I thought it was adding, word count until I realized that I really just need to get this book from point A to point Z in as seamlessly as possible. From when I finished it into what you guys read, I cut probably 40,000 words out of that, of them doing all of this stuff. Half of the sequel was also stuffed on the back end of the book. And So the hardest part was learning to just stay in my lane, get them to point A to point Z. There doesn't need to be a pirate battle. There doesn't need to be like a magical apothecary. Like, I'm saying these things because those are like actual things that I'm thinking of. Maybe this should be in the book. And now I've learned, though, as I've written the sequel, I've mapped out each chapter where I'm like, in this chapter they do this, and it's because in the next chapter this happens. And that, because I've mapped out each chapter that way, I am flying through the sequel. Like, I'm about 5K words ish more, and then I'll be done with the sequel. Like, it's right there, and I've written it so quickly, whereas The Storms We Inherit took me years because I kept going back and rewriting and fixing and planning this and unplanning that. And now that I have the sequel outline, I can just know where each chapter is going very intentionally. So that was the hardest part, learning to like stay in my lane, learning how to plan a chapter, learning how to say no to things, even if they're cool. Maybe there's a pirate scene in the next book. We'll see.
How long does it take you to plan out each chapter before you start writing it?
So that's a good question. It took me about probably a week to get from chapter 1 to chapter 50 of high level, this is what's happening in each chapter, like 2 or 3 sentences. Like, they go to this place and then they find this thing, and then next chapter. And then what I do is, so I have the full 1 through 50 of the sequel. Each chapter has about a sentence or 2 of what's happening. Then when I go to sit down and write, I pull up that outline and say I'm on chapter 15 or whatever. It says they go to the library and find the ancient text they needed to find. And that's all I have given myself. From there, I'll then do bullet points of like, they need to have this certain bit of dialogue for foreshadowing, and they need to have this type of like sensory experience, like they're sneezing because it's so dusty, like little details that I'll try and add into the chapter. But past that, I don't plan anything more. It's very much, I let the chapter kind of tell me what's happening, and I let the characters tell me what's happening. But even just that a little amount of planning really, really, really helps. And I think knowing the characters a lot better helps. Like, in this sequel, I feel like I have finally grasped. It took me a book to write to figure out, be close to them as, I don't know, not people's weird to say, but to feel close to them. It took me a while to write the book and really understand their character and their motivations and their voice. But now that I have that down, writing in the sequel has been really fun because they get to show me a little bit more of who they are. There's been times where I'm like, oh, this person is going to do this thing with this person. And then I write it and I'm like, this doesn't feel right. And it would be more cool if this person did this thing. And they surprise me in that way by doing it. And I write around their characters a lot of the time. I don't think this is a spoiler, so I'm just going to say it. But because they're all together in the second plane, in this sequel, the dynamic of everyone being in the same place, in the same room, has been so fun and interesting that the sequel is so much, it's very dialogue heavy because every character is getting the same amount of face time talking to each other and planning different things. And so that's been really fun. Just when you have more dialogue, you get to learn more about the characters in general. So
yeah,
I went way off from your original question, but
no, that's really fine. We appreciate it. I mean, we just want to pick your brain. But do you have a favorite character? Is it a Vander?
I think it might be, especially writing in the sequel. I think it might be. I think there is Easter eggs in the names of everyone, of who they are as kind of a character. And if anyone has Googled what the name of Vander means, then maybe you can see what his character arc might be.
Wait, now I want to look up what his name is. What does his name mean?
So did you put like a lot of thought and effort into the names then?
Yes. I tried to. Everyone except for Bridget, whose name changed like 17 times throughout the book. But yeah, she had many different names, and in her character, she would have like a dialogue, and then it would say like one of the names that in earlier versions was Margot, and I was like, I would just like stare at that word and be like, that's not right. And so it's really interesting when it comes to names that you have to cycle through a few sometimes before one sticks and you're like, that's her name, versus knowing names before you start to write the character because they're part of that character. So yeah, that's a very, very different experience, knowing the name before, or just having like an insert name here and then figuring out during the story who that character's name is.
I just looked it up. Emma, I might be right.
Oh,
Just saying.
I'll do a deep dive later.
Well, you and I will get into that later. Anyways, I think one thing that like really intrigued me though about this book is that like you did not know. Well, I don't think I know who is good or bad.
Yes.
And
morally gray. That's what that's called.
Yes, but it stresses me out because I'm like, I still actually don't know how I feel about almost every single character other than Lucia, because I'm like, I know obviously she's like, she was just thrown into everything. But everybody else, I'm like, are you good or are you bad? Or are you like, you just are good, but you have trauma, or like you're actually the evil bad person? Like, I couldn't tell. And so it was so intriguing to just keep reading because it's like, I just want to pick your brain as a character to know exactly like why you're doing the things that you're doing or what like made you choose that decision. And I still don't know who's good or who's bad. And maybe I just didn't understand everything, but
no, I think that's what I was going for, in that that's how real people are. Like
mm-hmm.
Everyone comes to a situation with a different background, a different perspective, a different motivation for something. And at the end of the day, like humans are very self-serving, and the bonds of family and legacy and doing what you think is right because your family expects that from you, that's really hard because you think you're doing a good thing, even if it's not, because there's that conflict of my family expects this of me. I want to make them proud, but so that means it's good. But then from someone looking at it from the outside, it's like, how could you even think, why would you let your family influence you in that way? Or I was really interested in that. And to the point I made earlier about the romantasy rut that I was in, I felt like a lot of characters were kind of like, that I was reading, there was like very clear lines of good, bad, evil, wrong. This is the good guy. This is the bad guy. This one has blonde hair. This one has dark hair. This one has shadows. This one has light, or whatever it was. And I was like, I want to find someone who's a little bit more in the middle and a little bit, maybe more realistic to someone you would meet in real life.
Yeah, Alexis might not like those not knowing who's good or bad, but those are my favorite type of characters because it makes me think more about the book and like adds to like theories. Like in this book, not just about the characters, but like the plot line. I was theorizing even in my sleep. Like I was like, what is going on? Like the second plane, I'm so intrigued by, and I'm like really interested to see if we see more about it and stuff.
Oh, that's awesome to hear.
Yeah, well, and two, I mean, I'm still intrigued and maybe also a little confused. And this, I think, is a spoiler, so we can cut it out, but I just want to mention it. Like the whole, I'm going to get the names wrong, so you can correct me, but like the prism or like the beam in his chest and that whole thing, I'm like, okay, wait, does that make you the bad person? Like, because you have that, like, because that's your legacy, like, because that's what you're supposed to be doing with your life? Or does that make you like a protector and like a whatever? Like, it's like,
I love that. That's awesome. Not a spoiler. Very interesting. But yeah, to your point, it's like what you inherit can be good, but then if you choose to use it in like negative ways, then it does it become bad? I don't think that that's a spoiler. I think that's a really interesting point of view of how obviously the inheritance is a key a key point of the book, but what you inherit from others and then how you choose to use it, if you're perpetuating the legacy of something or if you're carving a new path for yourself. And the prisms that the inheritors inherit are really integral to the sequel, and we learn more about those. But basically, I needed something. Remember how we talked about how it needed to be realistic magic? They couldn't just like walk through a stone into something. I needed to find a mechanism for how someone could actually separate beams of light, separate beams of gravity, play with time and time-space continuums. And the manipulation of light was kind of the easiest way in for me to do that. It started off with how they could access, inheritors could access the second plane was a ring. And then I was like, that scientifically, a magic ring isn't going to get you to a different reality. And then I was like, okay, maybe it's like a tattoo and the ink has special things. But I was grasping for straws of like what could be in the ink, like biochemical algae, like totally. The only thing that was the most realistic thing to get someone to manipulate light and gravity in that way was through bending it using glass in a prism. And then I was like, okay, so maybe like they hold it or it's a necklace. And then my best friend Hudson, who is a avid reader and is a very type A person and can kind of think through scenarios in a way that I sometimes can't. But she was like, it can't just be a necklace because people would steal it, or they can't just hold it because then people would want to steal it if it's like this super access to, be able to wield veils or get into a second plane. That's too risky. It has to be hidden in a way that only they know they have it, and it can't ever risk being stolen or lost. And so I was like, all right, well, they're going to swallow it, or where's it going to go? So the under the chest, by the heart type of thing was, like I said, I really tried to say, how could this be as realistic as possible? And I did use some kind of like jumps in logic in a few places when it came to the science, just because I'm not a physicist, but where I could make it, not a magic ring that they just happen to have, I did that.
I think that's really cool. And something about writing is like, it can be realistic in your book, even if it's not like in real life. Like, this makes total sense here. Don't overthink it.
Like, seriously, like, just, it's for the vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously, it's for the vibes. No, that's super interesting, like how you even came up with that idea, but I loved it because I'm like, it makes everything way more significant because of the fact that it's actually in their body, or like part of them. So it's way more important than just say a ring would have been, or a necklace. Like, this is like a way bigger deal because it's a part of themselves. So
true.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting. Did you always know who she was going to end up with at the end of book 1?
At the end of book 1, did I? I think so. I didn't know in what capacity, because Callan's character has gone through a lot of iterations. I would say that Norris and Evander, and this is kind of up for debate too, but I see them as like the main characters, and people are like, no, it's obviously Lucy is the main character, you dum-dum. Like, she's like the main girl. And I'm like, I guess, but she was kind of the catalyst to Evander and Norris's story. I don't know, I guess that's up for debate too, but I really knew Norris and Evander when I wrote this book. And I didn't know Lucia as well, and I didn't know Callan as well. He went through a lot of different iterations of who he was as a person. And at first he was kind of this like, rebel guy, like stereotypical, like romantic-y guy. I was like, oh, he's going to be grumpy and he's going to be a rebel. And then I was thinking about the time he came from, the reason he was there in the first place. And it's like, that doesn't really match that personality. This has to be someone who is flawed in a way that's not like, oh, I'm just angry because, you know, I don't even know why romantic guys are angry these days. What, they like lost a war 200 years ago and they're angry about it still. But I was like, he needs a reason that's like, he's anxious and he's shameful and he has doubts about his morality, like issues that are not talked about maybe in the books I was reading at the time. And so that's how I developed who he was. And I found that level of maybe anxiousness or doubt or shame echoed where Lucia was in this story a little more easier. I think towards the end, that version of Lucia would pair better with Evander. But when she entered the second plane, where she was in her character arc, she needed, I think, that softer side that Callan had at that time. So I think I knew she was going to end up with him, but I didn't know who he was really going to look like until I had written him a few different times over. And I didn't know how strong Lucia was going to be towards the end until I eventually got her there. So to answer your question, I knew they were going to be together. I just didn't know at what capacity. And like we've talked about, their relationship also kind of is just starting. So we still don't really know where that's going to end up.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting once we know more of each character and who they are and their backstory. Like, I'm interested to see more of Lucia and like how she plays into it, since it seems like she has a bigger role in like the whole second plane and everything like that.
Yeah.
And her connection to like Evander and Norris and all like their family and stuff, I find that very intriguing.
Yes, there's a significant connection between Lucia's family and Evander's family. So I'll say that.
I had
cousins.
I had a feeling there's obviously some greater connection, and obviously we kind of figured that out towards the end, which I'm not going to spoil anything, but when we find a little bit more about Lucia's grandma and kind of that sort of thing, I did have a little jaw-dropping moment when we found out some of these things. I was like, wait, what just happened? Wait, what? Like, how do I move on now? But I mean, it's still very intriguing because it's like you said, we don't really, I mean, we know the characters, we know them, we know what's going on, but there's still so much unknown. And I love that because it makes book 2 even more intriguing, because it's like, I'm so excited to just see like how they kind of develop. And Norris is another character that I'm trying to figure out if I like her or not. And I'm like, I think I like you, but I also hate you.
Yeah, like, most girls that you meet in college.
Yes, because I'm like, are you just like a family suck up sort of thing? Or do you like actually have outside other like ideas and things that you want to get done, but you just don't know how to go about that? And she's just so complicated that it's very intriguing to me.
Yes, she's very complicated. And to that same point, it's like she thinks she's doing something noble. She thinks she's doing something important to her family. And it's like, I think there's one line from one of Norris's chapters that I was like, did she feel bad that Lucia was going? Of course. But did that stop her from putting her family first? No. And putting your family first, on the surface, that's, a really good trait to have until it gets to this kind of inflection point and when it's not anymore. I've really enjoyed Norris. And yeah, to your point about learning more about the characters, what's been really interesting in these 2 books is that I feel like the first book is me creating the vibe, like the world and the vibe. And like the characters are there, obviously, but it's very, I feel like, more atmospheric, if anything. And then the sequel is the complete opposite, to where it's so about the characters, and it's mostly dialogue driven and character driven, and the atmosphere is kind of, it's still there, but it's I'm relying on people having already developed their sense of what this world is like in the sequel, so that I can focus more on the characters. And I think that's been really interesting for me as like a first time writer. Of this first book is very atmospheric, the second book is very character driven. What does that look like when you're writing it? How are styles different? What do people prefer? Do they like a mix of both? So yeah, that's been really, really interesting in terms of how different the first and second book are shaping out to be.
I was just going to say, is there only 2 books or is there going to be more?
Yes, not every series needs to be 5, 10, 20 books long. I'm over that a little bit. Listen, Throne of Glass, ACOTAR will have my heart forever, but not, I feel like every book is like, this is one of 6 books. And I'm like, why? I don't have that kind of money, and I don't have that kind of like, I there's so many books to read in this world that being stuck in one world for 10 books is like, okay, come on. Anyway, I'm going on a soapbox a little bit about the publishing industry right now as a whole, because I don't think if your series really does need to be 5 books long, go for it. That's amazing. You've put in 5 books worth of story planning, plot, characters, Easter eggs. Like, if you've done the work to make your book 5 books long, that's amazing. Do I think every author does that work, or just stretches out the same story for multiple books in order to get 5 books worth of money? I think it's more towards the latter today, which is unfortunate. But anyway, sorry, I'm stepping off my soapbox now. And to answer your question, 2 books, 2 books only.
Honestly, that's a relief, because I hate when I find a book on book 1 and they're like, okay, there's like 6 books in the series. I'm like, I have to wait all these years for the series to get finished.
It's so annoying, because you're like, okay, I've fully invested and now I have to wait for all these things, spend all my money on them, when in reality, some of these could have been shortened into like 3, like a trilogy instead of a 5-book series.
Love a trilogy. Love a trilogy. I think that's like the like the perfect way to like space out a story if you're going to put in the work of developing years long worth of character development. But yeah, I watch me write a 5-series book in a few years, and y'all are gonna be like, I told you not to do that. But yeah, I think book 1 and book 2 for this world. I think my future career, if I can even call it that, but my future ambition is to stay within dark academia. So I definitely want to stay in that world, but for the Storms We Inherit, it'll just be the book 1 and 2.
Are you trying to be like a full-time author? Like, is that your goal, or is this kind of like a side passion job for a while?
Definitely side. I think that to be full-time, like obviously that's like the dream for everyone. Like everyone wants that. But the unpredictability of it and the relying on other people to validate my income is really terrifying to me. Mm-hmm. Like in the corporate world, I'm responsible for my income. Like if I'm doing really well, I will make the money I make. With writing, you could be doing really well to yourself. Like I'm doing my best effort, and it's still predicated on, do others think it's good? That will determine if you like have grocery money or not. That's really scary to me. So until I get to the point where I could have a guaranteed income from writing, like through like a publisher or something like that, I don't see myself being kind of like free-birding for for a while. That's scary. That's so scary to me. But I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully, maybe if I go viral.
Hopefully.
So did you self-publish? Is that how you did it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there was a time where I considered traditional publishing, and I started querying my book. And okay, so do you remember how earlier in the episode I said that I'm not a planner and I'm not organized? That also happened to me when I was trying to query. I was just kind of sending it to agents that I thought would be interested, and I was sending maybe like emails that weren't exactly. Querying is very, you have to, like, the if you know type of thing. Like there's rules, there's formatting, there's styles, there's templates that you're supposed to be using, and I didn't maybe put in as much thought as I could have into the querying process. So I start querying, and it takes weeks to get agents to respond or even requests. And I had requests, and I would send the full manuscript, and then it would be weeks of waiting still. And during that time, I just felt so out of control of like, what's going to happen. I was checking my email all the time. I was getting rejections and I was getting requests, and I didn't know how to feel about being in the middle of those two emotions. And it was just like, okay, I'm waiting. And at the same time, I was looking at, Reddit forums and stuff, and people were saying, I got my agent, but then no one bought the book. Like it was out on sub to publisher houses, and publishing houses didn't buy it, or it's been on sub for 3-4 years. So I'm spending my entire summer feeling like this anchor in my stomach of like, am I going to get an agent? Am I going to get an agent? And then I was like, watch me get an agent. And then it takes years still past that. And I was just feeling like my confidence was just dwindling so much of like, this isn't fun anymore. Like I actively stopped reading books, which was like really scary for fellow readers of like, I don't feel like reading. I would get an ad on, or not an ad, but like a video of someone on like Book Talk. And it would trigger me of like anxiety, even just seeing people talking about books. And then I was like, this is really taking the fun, just like what I said earlier about like waiting for someone else's external validation to tell me if I'm doing like a good job, or it was getting really hard. So I think what I ultimately decided was, if I self-publish this first book to get it out into the world, at least I'll have something under my belt of when I approach querying in the future, or if I want to self-publish book 2 again, I'll feel like I have some type of confidence built up of at least something's in the world. At least I'm, talking about one thing that I've done already. And that's been really, really rewarding for me so far, this approach of build your confidence with something first. Just put it out into the world, get feedback, get criticism, practice, build your following. And now if I ever do approach querying in the future, or decide to stay as a, self-published author, I have kind of a confidence built up already of, okay, even if I don't ever get any agents to represent me, I at least have this one book out in the world, and people like it. And so, yeah, I've recommended that to a few people who have been trying to decide if they want to self-publish or go through traditional publishing. And again, my point of view was, your first book, it can be practice, you're getting it out into the world, you're talking to people about it. And then that way, when you are waiting in the trenches of querying, you have something else to kind of distract you on the side.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and actually like a really good perspective on it, because I mean, we've talked to however many authors now, and they've all self-published their first book. Yeah. And it's interesting to hear, because I feel like that's not, in the past, self-publishing was not a normal thing, but now it is becoming more of a normal thing for people to do if they've written a book, is to self-publish, especially the first book. And yeah, it's a lot of work, but is it worth it in the end to at least get that book out there, put it out, all this work that you put in out there? I mean, I would say yes. Yeah. So that was a really interesting perspective on all of it. And I mean, thank you for sharing that story, because it's like, that's really encouraging for those people out there who could be writing a book or thinking about writing a book of, okay, I can actually do this because I've seen somebody else do it.
Yeah, exactly. And it really does feel like practice, so that when you do shoot for the stars with your dream agent, Like you have inner confidence of, even if this doesn't work out, I can do it on my own. Like that's how I feel now. And people have asked me about like the cost of self-publishing, and it's not inexpensive at all. But how I viewed it was, I pictured it as like I'm taking a college course in how to publish a book. And when I viewed it as education of like, I'm spending this money and I'm graduating with a book and I know how to do this, it felt like an investment that was worth it, because now I can give advice on editing, I can give advice on formatting, I can show people like how to use Canva Pro to make a cover. I did it myself, and so it did feel like I graduated in a college course of how to publish a book, and yeah, the money was worth it.
Yeah, I found it interesting when you were like, you said that like you were getting like basically anxious, like you didn't want to read or write, like whatever, and then you just realized like what the problem was, and then you decided to self-publish to make it reading like the experience of reading happier, the experience of writing happier, because in the end that's basically why we all started reading. And if you write a book, that's why you write a book, is because it makes you happy. And if you're not happy doing either of those things, it's not really worth it, I wouldn't say.
So true. Yes, I literally spent the summer being like, am I good enough? Like, and then being like on Book Talk and feeling FOMO when people were talking about their books. And I was like, this is to what end? Like that I can do this myself and avoid anxious feelings, then I'm gonna do that. And yeah, now I'm back on my reading game, I'm back on my writing game. And to me, the goal was never to be like a famous author. Like obviously if that happens, like knock on wood, cool, but that's not my goal. My goal was to truly join in on a community, talk to fellow readers, talk to the people who have like, you know, ACOTAR tattoos, and be girly and silly. And if I write a book and people are interested in reading it and they want to have like a sequel, then that's exciting. It almost feels like a book club versus being an author. And I feel like I see a lot of people on Instagram or Book Talk trying to be so serious about being a self-published author. Like they're looking for a credibility for themselves of like, I'm self-published, but I'm trying to maybe overcome that by being very professional or being like, you know, very curated. But I think just being more authentic of getting to know girlies, being upfront of like where you got things wrong, being upfront about what you're excited about, and being as authentic as possible, that has made the journey a lot more fulfilling to me than trying to prove anything to anyone.
Yeah, that's super awesome. I think that's like, I mean, for you to end up like at the end of this journey of book one, to have that mindset now is really good and really healthy. And it's like exciting for you, because then it's like you can still be part of this community and like love it and not just be like outside of it.
Yes, exactly.
About it or anything like that. So that's super awesome. And like I just appreciate you like letting us in on that side of everything too, because again, like I'm sure there are a lot of our listeners who are writing a book or thinking about it, and it's like you can do it. We're not telling you can't. Nobody's telling you can't. You can. And it's super exciting. So I have another question, but I'm going to take a complete left turn because I wanted to talk about this with you, because I talk about it with every author that we have on, and Emma's going to laugh at me. But I want to know, well, no, kind of. I want to know about like the romance and all that, how you got about that, like writing the romance. Was like that really hard for you, or was it easy? And then also in book 2, will we have more romance?
By romance, do you mean like the open door scenes, or do you mean like the actual emotional romance?
Both.
Guys, I actually went to breakfast with my father-in-law this morning, who just finished the book and read chapter 44. If you know, you know. I was mortified. And he was like, how did you think to write that? And I had to explain to him that open door scenes are part of the genre. yeah, it was very awful to do. But I think I'll get to the emotional romance and the sequel. The open door romance was really hard because as a reader, I get such a spectrum where you get one book of like One Dark Window that has like no romance, like no open door, super spice, but still feel really fulfilled by the romance component of the story. Or then something completely different, like, what's the last smut book I read? Oh, Does It Hurt? You know, something like very, very smutty where the plot is kind of irrelevant to the smut. And I had a really hard time figuring out the balance between that. And at first I thought, well, readers are going to want the more smut side. Like they want more smut, just thinking that. And I was right that I was writing it and there was probably like three to four open door scenes in the original draft of this. And I was going back and reading it and I was like, this doesn't feel like authentic to me. This feels like it's kind of forced into the plot. Mm-hmm. And that's when I pulled it back to get the one open door scene that this book has. And that felt like a good balance because it was something that it was built up to. We did it and then we kind of faded into the sunset. That balance between how much smut do people want was hard for me to figure out as an author, and some hard for me to kind of be objective of as a reader. I had to Google like what a naked man looks like. No, I'm just kidding. I tried to do as much as I could respectfully of anatomy. The fact that she was on birth control was a late ad that I was like went back and I was like, this is important. I gotta add that safe sex into the open door scene. But yeah, the open door scene is something that I'm working on as an author to talk about, not blushing, and maybe I'll be more eloquent when I talk about it for the sequel. But in terms of the tension overall of romance, that was way harder than I ever thought it would be. Like, good tension and romance is way harder than you think it's going to be to write. Like, in books, I can spot it a mile away. I'm like, this isn't great. I don't like how they're this way, and I don't like that they're kind of surface level, or their dialogue feels forced, or I just can't see these characters in my mind doing what this author is saying they're doing. And then when I sit down to write it, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, it's actually really hard to like taste these things out and make the feeling you feel tangible into the story. So the romance that's a really good question because it is harder than you think it's going to be. And I am really excited for the sequel because remember how I said it's very like character? It's about the characters. There's 3 solidified romances happening in the sequel between 6 characters. And then there's an implied, maybe hinted at 4th romance happening. So if you like romance in the sequel, there's multiple character points of view and multiple romances happening at the same time in the sequel. And you can guess between who you know is all in the second plane right now, who's getting together and who's not getting together. But people are getting together because they're all there now.
Interesting.
I already have some thoughts.
I do too.
Wait, what are your thoughts? Tell me.
Well, I saw someone say Adim and Norris, and I was like, wait,
I heard that one.
I could see it.
I could too. You told me that one and I was like, wait, I could see it.
Things are happening between 3 solidified romances in the sequel and then a 4th kind of implied one. But that's been really fun with all like the romances. And that was really hard as someone who loves romance I have 3 romances happening. They can't all, as much as I would love them to be, they can't all be enemies to lovers. They can't all be Grumpy Sunshine. How can I make 3 individual romance stories different enough to be authentic to the characters and different enough to be interesting while still being tropey enough to like scratch all of our itches, or itch all of our scratches. So no, wait, it's to scratch and itch, right? Yeah. I was like, do you scratch and itch or do you itch a scratch? I don't remember. Either way, yeah, that was really hard to be like, well, how do all of these relationships feel different enough and individual enough, while still being a very romance-packed book?
Yeah. Well, so you said you're close to the end for the sequel.
Yes.
What's the timeline on that one? We're excited.
Yes. So my ambitious goal is to have it out by the end of the year. I'm hoping for it to be done by end of summer and arcs starting in the fall, and then a end of year release. And I do have a title, but I'm going to do kind of a big reveal for the title. If people have like guessed at the title, if it's going to be like something with storms, something with inheritance, yeah, I'll have to think of a special time to unveil that, but I'm really, really excited about the sequel for sure.
That's exciting. I am very excited for this. And I'm so glad that it's only one more book, so then we don't have to keep waiting. But I mean, if you wanted to all of a sudden decide you wanted to write a trilogy, I would have to deal and it would be okay. But I'm really excited that we can be satisfied and have the end.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And it comes to an end very naturally, which is nice. And yeah, this story only needed to be the 2 books. So
that's super exciting. Yeah, no, this has been super fun. Like, just thank you so much for like coming on and being a part of this. And we're really excited about this book because it's, like we said so many times already, it's so different from something that we've normally read. And so we're really excited to kind of hype it up and talk about it. And so if you haven't read The Storms We Inherit, please go get it. Rachel, you can tell them how they can go get it, how they can read it. And please let us know how you feel and like what your theories are, what you're excited about, because I am sure once we read book 2, we will have Rachel back on and we can deep dive into everything. But yeah, let our listeners know how they can get your book.
Absolutely. So it's on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and Kindle.
Perfect.
Your standard places.
Yes. Go get it. It's so worth it. It'll mess with your brain. It'll just, you just eat up the tension. It's so good.
Would you rather, like you as a person, not for Lucia, but you as a person, would you rather date a Deem, Colin, or Evander?
Evander.
Okay.
I think.
I'd have to say the same. There was just something about him. I fell in love with him right away. I don't know. There was just something about him that I'm like, also the way that he treated her there was just something about it. I just loved it.
I think for me, a Deem.
Really?
Yes. I love, like, he just seems so funny and so chill and so like nonchalant. And I love that.
But he runs. Emma, would you run with him?
He's very
athletic. He gets her coffee afterwards, so I think so.
I mean, fair. Right up your alley, actually. Somebody make you go work out, buy you coffee. Done.
Yeah, okay. I love that. Well, you're gonna love the sequel, and to get to know a little bit more about Adim and his backstory and who he is as a lover.
Oh, exciting. So one last quick question that we ask everybody that we have on, because you have to, because if you're a writer, you're also a reader. What is your favorite book and or series outside of your own?
Ever?
Yes.
No, there's no way. I have a different answer for like what season it is, what I'm wearing, like what mood I'm in. I think for the context of The Storms We Inherit, I will say The Secret History by Donna Tartt was really fundamental to me as a person, not to be dramatic, but it was really a very cornerstone book of my top books of all time. It's one of those books that come to mind whenever anyone asks me what's your favorite book. Definitely The Secret History. In terms of writing, I've never cried more and felt more emotionally emotionally attached to a book than The Song of Achilles.
Mm.
That book I was like ugly sobbing, like banging on the floor, kicking my feet, sobbing. But then I think I'm going to have to end that short list with Guitar. It changed my life. It introduced me to so many people. It made me feel girly. It made me feel giggly. It made me feel reconnected to fantasy in a way that I hadn't felt since I was a kid, and made me remember like kind of like the importance of girlhood and silliness, and that reading doesn't have to be this intimidating thing of like, you know, self-help or I don't know, just kind of more pretentious books. It can be something that is fun and emotional and like fantasy, and that doesn't discount the reading experience of it at all. It was definitely I think not only world changing for me, but world changing for like girlhood in general.
Yes. Well, that's where our friendship started with ACOTAR, so it has a special place in our heart. So yeah, that's where we started. Is I had read it, and Emma was like, we were in college, and she like turns over to me and she's like, "Have you read this?" And I'm like, "You haven't read this?" And she was like, "No." And I'm like, "Okay, I have the books. You're borrowing them. You're starting it tomorrow."
Yep. I wish there was like a royalties program for like influencing ACOTAR and like SJM to people, because I would be a millionaire by now.
Oh, me too. Me too. It's bad.
Like, you're welcome, SJM. Buy my book now, please.
If we can put that out there in the world for you, we wish we could. I wish we get her on this for you, but hopefully at some point. I mean, The Storms We Inherit was amazing. So thank you so much for spending time with us. This has been so much fun. We'll definitely have you back after the sequel is out, because I feel like we'll need to talk about that, because of course. But this has just been awesome, and we just want to thank you so much for letting us dive into your brain and learn about your writing process and all that fun stuff. So please, listeners, go get The Storms We Inherit. We need to talk about it. It's just been so good, and it has a special place in our heart because it's new.
That's done it the last 3 times to you. Only you.
Gestures so much. If you're not watching the videos, listeners, you need to be, because I gestured too much and it's kind of funny. Anyways.
No, this was great. Thank you guys so much for having me on and celebrating kind of small communities and indie authors. And I think I had like 240 followers at the time when y'all were starting to get interested in The Storms We Inherit. So that just shows that it's more about the community than it is about numbers or anything like that. So I really appreciate y'all championing. What's that word I'm looking for? But championing people who you're interested in. That's really special. So I had a blast. If anything, I'm an oversharer. So thanks for just letting me ramble for so long.
Oh my gosh, no, we loved it. I mean, that's how we are. So it was just so much fun to have you on. And so, yeah, I mean, look forward to us reaching out to you, because we'll want you on again, especially once we have book 2. So yes, listeners, next week we are talking to another author about a book called The Divine Draft. That's a new fantasy book that is out. So look forward to that episode. And then after that, we're taking the month of April off. So you won't have us for a whole month. Sorry, not sorry. We need to organize some things, and we are ending this season, this first year of our podcast. So then we will come back fresh in May and have season 2. So thank you so much for listening. We will see you next week. And then after that, it'll be a month before we see you again.